Hello, class, and welcome to today's class on social psychology. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie. In this class, we will be exploring a little bit about the self and the social context. And as we explore this, what we're doing is looking at understanding ourselves and our self-concept, our self-esteem, and our identity, and how it is deeply influenced by the social environments in which we live and how we interact with those social environments. Now, the understanding of ourselves in social psychology really helps us to see the connection between how we see ourselves in our personal identities and the broader social structures that shape our experiences, and how our sense of self can change with the environment that we're in. So just imagine you're attending a family gathering at home, and you're surrounded by people you've known your whole life. You're relaxed, maybe you're even a bit casual about how you behave. Now, picture yourself a few hours later at a formal job interview. You're more cautious, you're attentive to your words and your gestures, and possibly you feel a bit nervous. Now, I want you to just think about how different these two settings are and how you might behave differently in each, and why you behave differently. Why do you behave differently around friends, at home, at school, at work, at social gatherings? And what do those social contexts tell us that give us permission or influence us in ways that help us to behave differently? And then the question becomes, which one of those is the real us? Now, in today's class, as always, I like to start off with a little story, but then we'll cover a few main themes, as always. And in today's lecture, we'll cover, first off, a little bit about how do we form our sense of self and our social perception. We'll then explore a little bit how do we present ourselves and why do we present ourselves in different ways in different social situations. So, for example, how do people manage the impressions that they give off in social situations? What strategies do people use to present themselves in these different situations? And how do social norms and expected behaviors shape our behavior? And then finally, we'll explore how our social identities are formed based on group memberships and social roles. We all examine theories such as social identity theory and how belonging to different groups, whether that be based on race or gender or religion or professional affiliation, affects the social identity and self-concept of someone. And we'll then explore how does group membership shape self-identity. So those are some of the themes that we're going to explore in class today. Now, I would like to begin with telling you a little story about a very important person by the name of George Herbert Mead, who was a very pivotal role in the field of social psychology and is really kind of best known for his work on the concept of the self and its development through social interaction. Dr. Mead was born in 1863 in Massachusetts, and his work really kind of laid the groundwork for what is known as symbolic interactionalism. And he passed away in 1931. Now, Mead was most influential in how the self arises from social experiences and interactions, particularly through communications using symbols. So in his theory of the self, Mead introduces the whole concept of the I and the me. The I represents the spontaneous, creative, and individual aspect of the self, and the me represents the socialized aspect of the self, which is shaped basically by the societal expectations and norms. So the I is me by myself away from everything else. And the me is how I act in social situations, if you kind of have that clear. So that I and me are different in Mead's thinking. And Mead emphasized that the self is not present at birth, but it's something that emerges through a process of social interaction. And he really believed that the development of the self involves internalizing the perspectives of others, a process he called role-taking, where people will learn to see themselves through the eyes of others. And Mead also introduced the idea of the generalized other, which refers to the internalized attitudes and expectations and norms of society that influence an individual's self-concept and behavior. And so this whole concept is really crucial in understanding how an individual navigates social rules and how we maintain social order. So, just to be clear, the I is me by myself, the I is I by myself and Mead's ideas, and the me is that socialized sense of self that we kind of develop. Now, if we're to kind of think about why George Herbert Mead is important within social psychology, it's really about the fact that he bridged the gap between psychology and sociology in order to emphasize the importance of that social process and the interaction with others and the social rules and norms and expectations that come with that shape an individual's identity, that we are not really basically that we all have our own unique social experiences, and those social experiences frame who we are as a me. Okay, so we have that. Now let's kind of take a look at, in general, what we're talking about when we talk about the self in social psychology. Because that really kind of refers to a person's sense of how that person perceives and understands and defines themselves in relation to the world around them. So it's the self, the idea of the self is in a context. That's something that's very important. The self is not a fixed or isolated entity, but is deeply shaped by interactions with others, with societal norms, with cultural contexts. And so in this part of the lecture, what I want to do is really kind of introduce you to the key concept related to the self and explore the importance of how this plays itself out in human behavior. So if we're to kind of think of the self-concept, this is basically the collection of beliefs and thoughts and feelings that a person has about themselves. It is that mental representation of who we are. And so this is, of course, going to encompass our abilities, our characteristics, our values. And so self-concept is something that is built over time. And it's influenced by personal experiences and social interactions. So our self-concept is kind of a broad strokes sense of who we are based upon social interaction. Then there's our self-esteem. And self-esteem refers to how we evaluate ourselves in our self-concept. So it involves the degree to which we feel positive or negative about ourselves in our self-concept. It really kind of reflects our overall sense of worth or value. And so it's closely related to how others perceive us and how we perceive that they view us, and how we view others. And then there's the self-identity. And self-identity really kind of refers to the idea that we are aware of our own distinct social roles and personal characteristics. So there are things that make us different from others. And it's those things that form our self-identity. And these can be factors such as ethnicity and gender and social affiliation. And it helps a person to differentiate themselves from other people. And so why do we even study the self in social psychology? Well, we do this because these things play a role in how we decide to interact with the world, how we decide to engage or not in the world, how we relate to others. So, for example, self-esteem plays a key role in mental health. It's a great determiner in whether or not we develop anxiety, depression. So someone with low self-esteem may struggle with anxiety or depression, while those with a balanced self-esteem may thrive in a social environment. And so the self does not exist in isolation. That's something to remember as far as social psychology goes. The I might, but the self doesn't. It's shaped and reshaped by social context, by our continuing interactions with family and peers and colleagues and society at large. And all the social rules and cultural norms and group affiliations all contribute to how we see ourselves. The self, therefore, is fluid and changes based on the social environment. So, for example, an individual may have a different self-concept at home compared to at work or in social groups. Now, at this point, I encourage you to reflect upon your own self-perception. How do you view yourself at home? How do you view yourself at school? How do you view yourself at work? How do you want to view yourself in the future in each one of those places? And do these different environments influence how we think about ourselves? And I want you to kind of remember that self-concept and self-esteem shift depending upon our context. And so this really does highlight the whole dynamic nature of the self and social interaction. So when we think of self-concept, this is that whole collection of beliefs and perceptions that we have about ourselves. It includes our self-schemas, which are the cognitive structures that guide the way we process information about ourselves. Self-concept encompasses various aspects of life, such as abilities and values and personality traits and social roles. And importantly, self-concept is not fixed. It evolves over time. It's influenced by personal experiences and interactions with others. So self-concept really kind of answers that question, who am I? And I'm reminded of a poem by a scholar by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was actually in prison awaiting his hanging for trying to assassinate Adolf Hitler, and he wrote a poem called Who Am I? And I'd like you to, if you have a chance, read it. It's a profound question, and it's about context. Anyways, the whole idea of who am I really serves as a reference point for how we perceive and react to the world. It plays a vital role in shaping our emotions and motivations and behaviors. So, for example, an individual with a strong self-concept as an athlete may be more likely to take on physical challenges or identify closely with sports communities. So there's different theories about the whole around self-concept. One is in 1954, a researcher by the name of Leon Festinger introduced social comparison theory, which really posits that individuals evaluate their own opinions and abilities and self-worth by comparing themselves to others. And this comparison process helps individuals to understand their position relative to others in society and to contribute to the development of self-concept. And there are two types of social comparisons. There's upward social comparison, and with this really occurs when an individual compares themselves to others who are perceived as superior or more accomplished in certain areas. And while upward comparisons can inspire improvement, they may also lead to feelings of inadequacy or decreased self-esteem if the gap between the individual and the comparison target feels too wide. And then there's downward social comparison, and this happens when individuals compare themselves to others who are perceived as worse off or less competent. And downward comparisons can serve to boost self-esteem by providing a sense of superiority or relief. So the whole impact of self-concept and self-esteem really kind of ties in with the whole social comparison, because upward social comparison may lead to motivation and personal growth, but it can also lead to lower self-esteem if the individual feels like they don't measure up. And by the same token, downward social comparison can enhance your self-esteem, make yourself feel better, but it can also limit your personal development if you feel that you don't need to work so hard because you're overly secure in your abilities. And so the whole theory here helps to explain why people look at others so often. So like they look to peers, they look to colleagues, they look to social media for validation or reassurance about their own abilities and choices. So, when you think in terms of the social media age, one of the things that makes social media so attractive is that it gives a place for us to compare ourselves to others in a certain platform. And that's why you see a lot of people sometimes puffing up their success on social media, because it's part of that upward social or downward social comparison. And they're basically doing it to feed their own egos and their own sense of self-esteem. So back to the idea of self-esteem. Remember, self-esteem is that evaluative component of the whole self-concept. So it's going to refer to the overall value or worth a person really kind of assigns to themselves. So high self-esteem generally means a person feels confident and satisfied with who they are, while low self-esteem suggests that feelings are of inadequacy or self-doubt. Now, unlike self-concept, which answers that whole who am I question, self-esteem answers how do I feel about who I am. And self-esteem is fluid. It's shaped and influenced by experiences and achievements, and importantly, social feedback from others. And interactions with peers and family and colleagues and society at large contribute to the fluctuating nature of self-esteem throughout life. So positive feedback tends to bolster self-esteem, while negative feedback tends to diminish it. And here we can think in terms of the sociometer theory proposed by Mark Leary in 1995, which really suggests that self-esteem functions as an internal meter or a sociometer, and that basically just tracks the degree to which we are accepted or rejected by others. And so according to this theory, self-esteem is not merely a reflection of individual accomplishment or inherent worth, but rather a measure of social acceptance and belonging. And when individuals perceive themselves as being included and valued and respected by others, their self-esteem rises. Now, on the other hand, when they perceive rejection or criticism, self-esteem decreases. And so this theory highlights the importance of social relationships and interactions in shaping how individuals feel about themselves. Now, there's the dynamic relationship between social feedback and self-esteem. So basically, social feedback plays a really crucial role in maintaining or altering an individual's self-esteem. And feedback can either be positive feedback that includes praise and approval and validation, which contribute to higher self-esteem. So, for example, being praised for your academic achievements, your graduation ceremony, for example, or receiving supportive comments or being on the dean's list can boost your self-confidence and affirm your sense of self-worth. By contrast, negative feedback, which includes criticism and rejection or disapproval, can lower self-esteem. And negative interactions, such as being teased or rejected or criticized, can lead individuals to question their self-worth and perceive themselves as unworthy or inadequate. And social feedback really does affect how individuals perceive themselves. Just need to kind of remember the whole idea of constructive criticism from a trusted friend or a mentor can encourage personal growth and self-esteem over time. But harsh criticism or rejection can lead to feelings of insecurity and social withdrawal, potentially resulting in low self-esteem and poor mental health outcomes like anxiety and depression. Now, we can kind of think in terms of our social media again. When we have these limited face-to-face interactions and we interact with others online, we're looking for social feedback. We're looking for likes. We're looking for followers. We're looking for comments. And these have now become part of that social feedback loop. Then we can think in terms of social presentation. And social presentation really is the idea that a person attempts to control how others perceive them. Now, in social interactions, people are often motivated to create favorable impressions of themselves, to be accepted, to be liked, or respected by others. And self-presentation not only is about showing off one's best abilities, but also about managing the impressions others form of us based on social context. So, for example, how you present yourself in a job interview may differ from how you behave around close friends. And the ability to adapt and present different versions of oneself, depending upon the social situation, is a key aspect of social functioning. Now, we can think here in terms of a sociologist by the name of Erving Goffman, who developed what is called the dramaturgical theory to describe social interaction as basically a theatrical performance. So according to Goffman, we are all actors on this whole stage of life and continuously managing our roles and performances to meet societal expectations and influence how others perceive us. And so there's some key components of Goffman's theory here. There's the front stage, and so this is the public area where individuals perform and present themselves to an audience, so to other people, in ways that align with social norms and expectations. So, for example, in a classroom or workplace setting, individuals may present themselves as competent and professional or friendly. And then there's the backstage. And this is the private area where individuals can relax and be themselves without worrying about how they are being perceived. And here, people are free from social pressures and can express their true feelings and behaviors. So, for example, at home with close friends or family, people may let their guard down and behave more naturally. And Goffman's theory really emphasizes that social life is a series of performances in which individuals use different strategies to create favorable impressions and avoid negative judgments. And so there's the idea of impression management, which is basically the whole process of controlling the impressions others form of us. So people engage in impression management for various reasons, such as gaining social approval, avoiding embarrassment, or achieving social goals. And along these lines, there's some key strategies in impression management. One is self-monitoring. And so this is where a person uses their ability to regulate their behavior to fit the demand of the social situation. High social monitors are particularly adept at adjusting their behavior to match the expectations of different social environments, while low social monitors may be less concerned about how they're perceived by others. Then there is the self-handicapping, and this is a strategy that involves excuses or obstacles to justify a potential failure. So by engaging in self-handicapping, individuals protect their self-esteem by attributing failure to external factors rather than their own ability. So for example, a student may claim that they didn't study for an exam, so if they do poorly, they can blame the lack of prep rather than their intelligence, which is fair. But it's a way of managing the self. And of course, people present different versions of themselves depending upon the social context. So like in a professional context, you're going to want to emphasize that you are competent and reliable and an expert. But in a casual context, you're going to want to emphasize your humor and your warmth and your approachability to connect with others on a personal level, both of which are legitimate, but they're very different depending upon the context. So now we come to the idea of social identity theory. And this is from Henry Treifel and John Turner in 1979, where they posit that a person's self-concept is closely tied to their membership in social groups. So according to this theory, an individual defines themselves not only based upon their personal traits, but also through their affiliations with social categories such as nationality or ethnicity or religion or professional groups. So social identity contributes to how we perceive ourselves and shapes our interactions with others. And so there are in-groups, and so an in-group is the group in which an individual identifies and feels a sense of belonging, and they have positive feelings, and favoritism are often directed toward members of the in-group. And then there's the out-group, and this would be the group with which an individual does not identify and may feel indifferent or even hostile towards. And people often view members of outgroups as different or inferior, leading to a social bias or discrimination. So when we tie all this together, social identity theory really highlights that our self-concept is shaped not only by our individual traits, but also our sense of belonging to larger social entities. So for example, being part of a sports team or a university or a political group or a cultural community can significantly impact how we see ourselves and how we behave. Now, when our group is successful or valued, our self-esteem tends to increase, while belonging to a stigmatized or marginalized group may lower our self-esteem. So in-group and out-group dynamics play a powerful role in shaping how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive others. There is that in-group favoritism, where a person tends to view members of their in-group more positively. And then the out-group is basically everybody else. And oftentimes we stereotype those that are in the out-group and do not recognize that they are still very different. And so we have it's just a natural tendency, because people are lazy in their thinking, towards prejudice, discrimination, and conflict between groups. So that's something that we need to be mindful of as well. And then there's the idea of social regulation and social environment. And self-regulation really kind of refers to the ability to control one's thoughts and emotions and behaviors in the face of social expectations and personal goals. This is a frontal lobe activity. And it's really crucial for our processing as an individual to align our actions with societal norms and ethical principles and personal values in order to function within a society. So self-regulation helps an individual maintain social harmony, achieve long-term goals, and manage impulses that might lead to socially undesirable outcomes. So there's something called self-discrepancy theory that was developed by Torrey Higgins in 1987, which provides a bit of a framework for understanding the emotional consequences of discrepancies between different versions of the self. There's first off the actual self, and this represents who you believe you are based on your current behaviors, characteristics, and attributes. There's your ideal self, and this is the version of yourself that you aspire to be based on personal desires, goals, and values. And then there's the ought self. And this reflects who you believe you should be based on external expectations and social norms. And according to Higgins, discrepancies between these different selves can lead to various emotional outcomes. There's the actual ideal discrepancy, and that's when individuals perceive a gap between their actual and individual selves. They may experience feelings of disappointment, frustration, or sadness. And this can occur when personal goals are unmet or when one feels they are not living up to their own standards. And then there's the actual ought discrepancy, when the individual perceives a gap between their actual and ought selves. And they experience then feelings of guilt and anxiety and shame. And these often result from a failure to meet some kind of external expectation, such as societal expectations or familial expectations. So these are all issues that we need to kind of be mindful of as well. Now, this kind of brings us to the close of this lecture. Hope you enjoyed this lecture. A couple of key terms I'd like to highlight here. First off, the idea of self-concept is that whole collection of beliefs and values and characteristics that individuals hold about themselves. And so this is going to encompass self-schemas, which are basically those mental structures that guide how people think about themselves. Then there's social identity, and this is where a person's sense of who they are is based upon their group memberships. And this concept emphasizes that self-concept is influenced by affiliations with social groups such as nationality, ethnicity, or profession. And then there's the self-regulation, and this is the process through which individuals control their thoughts and emotions and behaviors in alignment with their goals and societal expectations. And this involves managing impulses and adjusting behavior based on social context. And so, I just want to kind of close with a little bit of a multiple choice question. Which theory suggests that individuals compare themselves to others to evaluate their own abilities and self-worth? Self-regulation theory? Yeah, probably not. Social discrepancy theory? Not quite. Social identity theory? Not so much. So probably the best one here would be social comparison theory. Yeah, that would do it. So, in today's lecture, we explored the dynamic relationship between the self and the social context, from understanding self-concept and self-identity to managing self-presentation and regulating our behavior in line with societal expectations. In all of this, I hope it's clear that the self is not isolated, but is something that is deeply intertwined with our social surroundings. Our self-perception, our self-esteem, and identity are things that are continuously shaped by interactions with others and the social groups we belong to. Hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I'll see you next week. You take care. Bye-bye.